Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Are you struggling to understand why fear drives our decision-making in high-pressure situations? Then don't miss my video lecture, Why Fear Makes Us Say Yes When We Knew We Should Have Said No. As a therapist and an educator, I delve into the psychology of fear-based compliance. Whether you've experienced it in cults, controlling relationships, corporate cultures, multi-level marketing, really anywhere. Learn how skilled manipulators get us to override our instincts, silence our doubts, and say yes when everything inside wants us to say no. Discover how we fear being labeled difficult and the psychological mechanisms that keep us complying with others' demands. This lecture and many more are available for purchase on my website, rachelbernsteintherapy.com. Just follow the link in the description of this episode to view and purchase all of the available lecture videos. Take good care. Hello, everyone. Today on the show, we have someone who is going to be talking about his story with such honesty, really opening up about his experiences. I'm really excited to have you hear him. His name is Timothy Heffelbower, and he graduated from the Teen Mania's Honor Academy and toured with their Acquire the Fire youth events on 2 different tours and as an actor in one of them. He is a cult survivor, a sexual abuse survivor, an author, a soldier, and most importantly, a husband and father who dearly loves his family. Here is Timothy now. I am so happy to have Timothy Heffelbower with me today. I know that this is going to be one of those conversations where we're going to learn so much, not just about Teen Mania Ministries, but about the bigger issues here, because I can tell from some of the things that you've done, some of the things that I have read about you and things that you've said, that this will be a conversation that's micro and macro. This is about the organization itself, how it has split off, and it's important to note that organizations will do that. They'll spring up with other names, and it's good to keep track that it's all another arm of the same organism. But it is also important on a macro level to see how these sorts of things can happen and what it means and the impact, the far-reaching impact it has on the members and also society at large. So we could take this discussion many different places, but I would love you to start and just spend a few moments introducing yourself to those listening.
Rachel, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. So my name is Timothy. I am 33. I was at Teen Mania for 3 years right out of high school. So it was something where my dad encouraged me to go. And when I say encouraged, he gave me an ultimatum where he said I could either go and he would help pay for it, or I could go out into the world in large and figure it out myself as a 17-year-old kid. So I was highly encouraged to go to Teen Mania. We'll say it like that. So since Teen Mania, I've been a part of a couple different churches. I've had plenty of train wrecks back there too. Right now, I have a wife. I have 2 beautiful kids with her, and we have 4 other kids from our previous marriages. So we have a huge, giant Brady Bunch style blended family.
Nice.
And I also just finished basic training in AIT. I've been back from that for a month and a half now.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. I have a quick question actually about that before we launch into your story, if you don't mind. There are people who will talk about that. They'll be in basic training, they'll be in something that is intensive, and then need to shift away from that back into the world. And if you're not used to making that shift, it's not an easy one. Being able to have a schedule that comes back to being yours and making, I guess, your own sorts of decisions. And I was just wondering about that. People sometimes liken it to leaving a cultic situation. It doesn't mean that it has that level of control, but it's structured. And so, how do you land for the first couple weeks after leaving something like that? If you don't mind, I know this is potentially tangential, but it's something people have asked me about when they come out of structured environments.
Well, honestly, there was not too much difference between my time in basic and my time at the Honor Academy, except it was a lot shorter. My time at the Honor Academy, I was there for 3 years. At basic, I was there for 3.5 months. But the control structure, as far as having a drill sergeant that wakes you up every morning, puts you to bed every night, certain times where you're allowed to eat, you have to eat within a certain time frame. It wasn't as intensive at the Honor Academy as far as the eating goes, but there was definitely the you will be up at this time, will be over. They called it the anvil, which was it was a concrete pad where they did the sports at. We had basketball courts on it, but we did corporate exercise every single morning at 5 o'clock. So you'd be up at 4:30. You'd have to be there by 5 o'clock, and then you'd start exercising. With the military, we didn't necessarily do a bunch of exercise in the morning. We did exercise all throughout the day. Coming back into normal society, unfortunately for me at this point, is kind of like a second hat type of thing because I've dealt with it a couple different times now. It's the first time with the military, but there is a switch that you have to make. There is a certain amount of processing that you have to go through. I know us people who are ex-evangelical like to use the word deconstruction. There's a certain amount of deconstruction you have to do in order to get back out of that mindset and into a civilian one. And I'm reserved, so I have a civilian job, but then I have my military responsibilities, of course. So that's what I guess the normal ebb and flow, because you learn to talk about things in a different light. You learn to use different words for things. You don't necessarily use the bathroom, you go utilize the latrine. And when you go into public and you say, could you show me where the latrine is? I need to go utilize it. People look at you a little funny and they're saying, what are you talking about? Did you come over from England? I'm not sure what's going on. So it does take a couple breaths to get there.
Interesting. It says something also about the different kind of language and also people need to get used to, but the adaptability of human beings, but that it takes a little bit to give yourself that little bit. And I think also to prepare the people in your life, this is going to take me a minute, I think is an interesting thing to make those kinds of transitions and to see that it's possible for people born and raised in things. Sometimes it takes quite some time to make those adjustments, but it feels like it's worth it when they want to be able to have a life that feels more aligned with who they are and the freedoms they want to be able to have. So now to thank you for that. To switch gears, let's talk about Teen Mania Ministries and how you got involved. And also just the word mania is so interesting as a therapist because it's problematic. There is a book by a man named Dr. John Hunter. It's called Manufacturing Mania. He was on the show, and it talks about how there are some places that will do that, but as a way of controlling you. So I find it a very interesting word and a very interesting state that people want you to get into so that you are more malleable and open to suggestion and you feel very excited about everything, thinking it's the best thing ever because you're in a state of mania, which is fascinating. So let's talk about Teen Mania Ministries. Tell me about it and also your experience within it.
Yes, ma'am. So, Teen Mania Ministries, founded, I believe, in 1986 by Ron and Katie Luce. The chosen word mania that you were highlighting there came because it was the 80s and it was just this height of everything being crazy and the biggest and the brightest and the best. So they had that type of course, Ron's a very intense individual. He goes hard all the time. I think the idea was to attract people that also had that same drive and intensity towards ministry, in a sense. In its purest form, the idea was an evangelical context. I'll explain a little bit. I'm sure most people understand this, but I'm sure a couple of your podcast listeners don't. We formerly evangelical. The idea was that we were supposed to try to save people, convert them from their ways of thinking to thinking and seeing towards Jesus Christ. And Jesus was supposed to save them, save their soul. He would change them and make them a different person, and then they would be able to follow the ways or the instructions in the Bible, essentially. By doing so, they would inherit eternal life, salvation. So the idea is, the overarching belief is that if we can turn somebody from their lifestyle of sin, missing the mark, what is called as missing the mark is sin, where you're not living up to the expectations and the beliefs that the Bible has laid out for you, and we can turn you back to that spot, that we can get you to a point where heaven will accept you, essentially. It's not that you earn your way. It's so difficult because there's like a legalism idea where you're not supposed to earn your way into heaven, but if you're not hitting these marks, then you're not going to make it into heaven, if that makes sense. The marks show your belief, your true belief in Jesus Christ. And that's the fine line that you're supposed to walk as an evangelical. And so, in a lot of our minds, especially as impressionable young teenagers, and with parents who are very much raised in the same doctrine or denomination. And I'll even take it a step back to the 1990s when I was growing up. So I was born in 91. I remember my church doing these productions every single year. Ours was called Beyond the Grave. Apparently, my wife had one at her church where it was called Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Uh-huh.
Quite a title. Wait till you hear about the drama. It's even better.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know it said in your bio that you're an actor in one of these, so I'm curious about your experience. But yes, I do want to hear all of it. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So, Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames, which I believe was the more common name, and that was out of the Assemblies of God denomination. They would have a couple of actors up on stage, and like I said, the idea is that you turn towards inheriting eternal life. The flip side of the coin, the tail side to the heads there, is if you don't turn, then you inherit eternal damnation or eternal condemnation, and you end up in hell in the lake of fire forever. And so there's a very sensationalized version of this that really took root back in the 70s and 80s in the Jesus movement. And then in the 90s was kind of the outgrowth of all these people who had grown up in that and the way that they were doing media and productions to demonstrate those things. So you would have Tommy, your typical boy, who's going through living life and he decides to choose cigarettes and he decides to choose drinking. He's underage. He's drinking underage. Then Tommy ends up getting in a car accident because he was drinking and he dies. And he has to go up in front of the great judge of the universe, God. And God looks at his life and says, well, you were smoking pot and you were doing underage drinking and you were doing this and that. And because you didn't believe on my son, Jesus Christ, you're sentenced to hell for all eternity. And then all these demon-like figures would rush the stage and they would whisk Tommy away into this place where this dramatic strobe light is just going crazy and pyrotechnics are shooting off because hell's flames and all these things. And then there would be Kathy, who was, of course, a good Christian girl who went to church and did her best. And she would end up having some sort of accident too, where she got killed. And then she would be brought in front of God, the great judge of the universe. And he would say something to the effect of, well, you clearly believe on my son, Jesus Christ. You're doing everything that you can for his glory and his kingdom. Enter into heaven here. And she would go and be carried off by these angel figures into this wonderful paradise. And so that's what we watched when we were 5, 6, 7 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly, right? It took a lot of unpacking later in life to get through that.
I'm sure. And those things, I also wonder, a lot of these groups, they don't really know about kids and they don't know about child development and they're not sensitive and aware of the impact of terrifying imagery and fear-based premonition. And it's very black and white. This is what's going to happen to you if you do this. This is what's going to happen to you if you don't. And then a lot of these things, I don't know if they were done during the day or done at night, but sometimes it's like people who talk to me who were raised in Jehovah's Witnesses being given these magazines with also like the fires of hell coming through the cracks in the sidewalk. And then it was, okay, good night. Mm. And so there are a lot of people now who will say, I have night terrors. I am someone who has nightmares a lot. I have a lot of visions in my head because these were like bedtime stories. These were the things watched right before we went to sleep or sometime during the day, but there was no way to address the feelings that had come up and the terror that I was feeling inside. And a lot of kids also talk about having, later on, they talk about having physical symptoms and not understanding the connection that they were bedwetting or they were clenching their jaw or having other kinds of pain, headaches, stomach aches, and not knowing that it came from this. And the group itself didn't have that awareness. And I think also didn't mind offering this panic laced into the story because it was a way of making sure people did the right thing and behaved. I just wanted to put that out there that this is terrifying for most people, but especially for young kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what happened was because the idea was to get us as the next generation to try to reach our friends. And so even when I was in second and third grade, I guess first and second grade, my parents got called and I got in trouble with the principal's office because I was bringing tracts to school and passing them out to all my classmates because I was worried that they were going to end up not being saved and not ending up in heaven. And my parents, of course, were really proud of this fact. This was like a thumbs up gold star moment in their life. Our son's doing everything he can to reach his classmates. So the fear or the terror of what was going to happen if they didn't repent, change the direction of their life, and go towards Jesus Christ and heaven was an incredible weight to carry as a kid. And I've heard a lot of stories from Jehovah's Witnesses who essentially have some of the same ideas or same beliefs where it's like we have to go out and get these people to understand and believe, the kingdom of heaven's at hand. And this is what's going to happen if you're not on board, essentially. So growing up in that type of environment and then finding a place like Teen Mania Ministries, that mania word, it was like in our heads, the idea was here are people that are going to go just as hard and going to work just as hard and be just as vigilant about saving their peers, about saving the kids that are our age, saving them, of course, getting them from that path towards destruction to that path towards eternal life. That was an incredible burden for a lot of us to carry, but it was also looked on as something to aspire to. It was also held in this great esteem where if you're doing these things and you're literally advancing God's kingdom on earth, there was this duality to it. There was a great push towards it, and there was also like a great expectation of consequence if it didn't happen, if that makes sense. So we knew that we were okay because we were clearly on the path doing the right thing. But if we couldn't get these other people, then heaven was going to be very underpopulated. And all those people that we knew as our friends, as our peers, that we had gone to high school with, middle school with, people that we had seen in college, we're going to end up in these terrible situations. And it's heightened every single time that there's personal tragedy involved because you have to stop and think, did that person end up going to hell or not? So there was a kid in my school, for instance, I think it was my sophomore year, who got in a car crash. He was running from the police because he was drunk as a skunk. There were 3 people in the car, and him and his partner, their passenger in the front seat, both got killed in this car wreck. And then the guy in the back was able to make it out and he survived. But the funerals for these 2 people, of course, there was a lot of angst among the Christian population because they're like, is this guy in heaven? Is he really in heaven? He was running away from the cops because he was drunk. And the thing is that it's so black and white too. There's never a nuance in it. There's never a, why was he drinking? What caused him to get to that point psychologically in his head where he felt like this was an escape route that he needed to take? Is there a certain amount of just juvenile behavior where sometimes kids are kids and they just do something crazy? Or is there something that drove him to that was abusive in his home? Or was there another layer to it? There's never a discussion of those things. The discussion was, well, he was drinking and he was running away from the cops and he's definitely in hell now. And if you don't do something about it, all of these other people are going to end up there too.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, a couple things about that. When you don't operate in the gray, it's true, then you don't really have a nuanced understanding of a situation. And you might not ask the question why. You just go to what are the facts, the surface facts, and not understanding if this kid, I don't know this person, so I don't know the situation. So I'm not saying this is what happened, but sometimes when people are drinking, it's because their life has been so restrictive that when they have an opportunity to do something, they just really go for it and do it because they haven't had any opportunities for that kind of freedom before. Or they're depressed, or there's abuse, or something. Or because they are open to influence, they could be more open to peer influence. Who knows? But I think then it's hard once there is just a story like that that's used as a cautionary tale for others. It feels like the compassion is missing. Let's try to, instead of seeing what happened to this person and being part of their judge and jury, let's try to just feel sorry for the family and for them and just have the softer emotions. It feels like there's not a lot of space for that.
Absolutely. And in that sense, I feel like it is militant. There is a purpose, there is an objective that has to be achieved. And whatever ends that we have to do in order to reach that objective, the ends justify the means, essentially. So when we end up getting recruited to a place like Teen Mania, I say recruited. It feels like the right word, but obviously there's a certain person that's going to answer that call, if that makes sense. So in our family, my dad was a very restrictive person. He's since apologized for some of that, but there are some things that he holds firm on and stands with. But his belief system has obviously changed a bit in the years, as has all of ours. My brother went first, and my brother went and had a tremendous experience. He was a person that really enjoyed his time there. He said that he refused to watch the documentary because he's like, it's somebody with an agenda just trying to say something about it. And my brother was also only there for 1 year. And I will point out that, as with most organizations, at the bottom, you don't see nearly as much of it. And as you start to advance up the ranks, you start to see more and more and more. The higher that you advance, the more that you'll see the problems and the issues that start to permeate through the entire organization, the culture. But there are a lot of people like him that just had a really good experience. And I will also point out that evangelical Christianity has worked out for him, in the sense of he's had a good life. There hasn't been any major train wrecks. There have definitely been challenges. Don't get me wrong. My brother's overcome a lot of challenges, but there's been community there. There's been people that have kind of held beside him and upheld him. Whereas when I went later in life, I ended up having a complete falling out of community. And I'll get to that later in the story. But that is what I noticed to be a major difference between the people that look back on their time at Teen Mania. Because honestly, when I was there at the internship, I had a great time. I definitely noticed there were some things that seemed a little bit off or a little off putting. They were weird, but I wasn't necessarily like shocked and abhorrent and horrified at what was going on. I was still in that idea of the ends justify the means. But then there's an end beyond that. The end beyond that is when I finish, and I've given 3 years of my life to this, I'm still just 20 years old. I have my whole entire life ahead of me. And then I have to live with the consequences of this foundational piece that I've laid on my life as I try to build it, if that makes sense. So Teen Mania was made for people who were straight, white, males. And sure, there were a bunch of women that were there too. And I was athletic, doing all the corporate exercise and all the runs through the morning and everything else. It ended up suiting me very well. I was consistently in the top finishers. I was always doing well. And people felt like that meant that I must have had some great spiritual insight, because running a race fast means that you're closer to God.
Really? Okay.
I mean, in some respects, it's not overtly stated, but the idea is that if you're doing all the things right, we had accountability cards. So if you're able to check off all the items on your accountability card, if you're not falling asleep during quiet time, they'd wake us up at 4:30 and we'd do our exercise. And then after we showered, we had between 6 and 7, where we were supposed to be reading our Bibles. If you fell asleep, you were wrong. And then you got to go do extra training on Saturday. So there was that.
If you fell asleep, you were wrong. That happens a lot. I hear a lot about that people who are really exhausted also are admonished and judged for falling asleep. Just your body telling you what it needs. That's really all that it is.
Right. Well, there's a saying that they use there: tired people rule the world. Tired people run the world. I think that's what they said. We would do that. We would have classes after. So we'd have breakfast, then we'd do classes, then we'd go to our ministry placement. So we wouldn't have classes every day, but most days. And Dave Haas would address us. He'd say, there's no shame in being tired. There's great shame in falling asleep. So the idea was you stood up, you stood to the side, you stood somewhere and tried to make your way through class, regardless of what was going on. After this demanding schedule and going through class and all those things, again, it was us just trying to buy in and do the best that we could. And I think that they were putting forth a genuine effort. When it really comes down to it, I think that they felt like they were doing what was right for people. I don't think that they were doing it in the sense of trying to sabotage or mess somebody up for life. But at the end of the day, this great emphasis on the accountability cards, this great emphasis on making sure you check the boxes and you do the things right and don't fall asleep during quiet time. You show up to corporate exercise every single day. And even if you can't participate, you're still expected to sit there. And then we pray for your healing because God answers prayers. So we're going to go ahead and pray healing over you until you can exercise with us. I do know a couple times people would have something like pneumonia and they'd say, yeah, you probably shouldn't be out in the cold. But that was kind of also left up to the jurisdiction of another 20-year-old sometimes. Somebody who was like a third-year dorm director intern would say, hey, this person has pneumonia, we're going to leave them in the dorms. Or this person has pneumonia, but God heals people, so we need to have them down here and we need to be praying for them.
Was there a thought about why they got pneumonia to begin with? Was there any idea that somehow it was a punishment for something?
I got to reflect back on this for a second. There were certainly moments where people would say that. When we ever had autoimmune diseases, for instance, that would definitely be something where this is a spiritual affliction. Autoimmune disease, your body is turning on itself, and it's because you hold great shame over this area in your life where you have not achieved victory yet. Some of that, again, is just a bunch of teenagers being crazy and not knowing any better in life. And I think a lot of the fault that I found with the Honor Academy was the fact that teenagers who were crazy and didn't know any better were the ones that were in leadership positions, consistently making these choices for people. I think somebody with a little bit more seasoned wisdom would have been able to step in and say, all right, I appreciate the heart behind what you guys are doing, but you're way too overboard with it. This needs to be reined back in. But realistically, we were raised up as essentially an army for God. And we were raised up with the idea that we were going to think in this pattern, we were going to act in this pattern, and there weren't enough qualified individuals overseeing things to be able to stop a lot of that before it started. And certainly, Ron would share sometimes about how in the early days of the ministry, he would work 20-hour days consistently, and he expected everybody else to work 20-hour days because we're trying to save souls. We're trying to keep people out of hell. And he said he kind of walked that back later in his life. Because when I was there, Teen Mania was already 15 years in, essentially. So he had the chance to realize people aren't going to be able to sustain this. Some older, wiser people spoke into his life and said, this isn't the way. He was able to make an adjustment there. But in other ways, he still maintained that same intensity and passion and fire for this. And because there was not the proper amount of oversight, there was only one licensed counselor on campus when I got there, and he was gone by the end of my intern year. He accepted a different job. He wasn't kicked off the campus. And then there were none. There were zero. So they had life coaches that they would bring in occasionally, people who had some acumen in the business world who would be able to talk to you, a teenager, and say, hey, this is what you need to do, or this is a great spot to start knocking on doors at, or metaphorically, we weren't actually going door to door and trying to get people saved. A couple of us did. That wasn't expected. I'll say that. But it was not very well structured with oversight. And the staff members that were there were paid a pretty small, simple amount where they could barely afford to live. As much money as we could was used towards the ministry. I think it really infuriated people later because you'd see, and I'm not saying anything against these people, Bishop T.D. Jakes would be brought in to speak at some of these events, and he would command royalties of $100,000 just to be brought in to speak. And then you have 5 staff members that are living off of $100,000 combined, each one of them making 20 a year. And they were getting off nice because the rest of us were fundraising just to be able to stay there. I paid my own way through 3 different years. And I did it by calling people up and being like, hey, could you donate to me? Could you donate to my ability to stay at this internship? There are several times that I ended up getting close to being financially dismissed as well. I just kept on working through it. I just didn't take the fundraising days, and eventually people forgot. And then somebody would donate and they'd be like, hey, your account's good. And I was like, thank goodness. Because if I had gotten dismissed, I didn't have anywhere to go. I would have had literally no money to my name. I would have been kicked off the campus, and I would have had everything that I owned fit in 2 duffel bags. And I would have just walked until I found someone that was willing to take me in. That's what I would have had.
With the whole financial stuff, there have been a lot of financial issues with this group and bankruptcies and a lot of other things and misappropriation. Not atypical, actually, but still, when you have some distance away from it and you start to look at how things didn't quite come together and people were really struggling and didn't have the money for things that they probably really needed. And then you have someone coming in to give a talk who's paid $100,000, showing there is money there to pay them. They do a lot in these organizations, it seems, to make that all make sense at the time. What was the philosophy about people being able to have enough to live off of? Or was it to keep people kind of hungry and wanting to feel like they had to keep working in order to deserve even making the little bit that they had? What did it do to people there when there was such inequity in that way and stress around being able to support yourself?
I think there was always a constant struggle and a survival mentality. And I will tell you, I am going to pull this one out a little bit further than just Teen Mania and kind of go through my life a little bit since Teen Mania and how this has played out, because that's a great question. It deserves an explanation beyond just the 3 years I spent there. So, this constant struggle, this idea that struggle was the norm, struggle was what you were going to have to deal with consistently. First off, we didn't know that TD Jakes was getting $100,000 for a speaker fee. If that's what he's worth, then that's what he's worth. I'm not trashing him at all. That industry is its own separate thing, and people establish their prices and whatnot. It's just hard to justify, why are we bringing him in to speak if we really need this money for other things? And I get it, because he's going to draw an audience, and he should. I mean, he's a very talented speaker. He's a multi-time author that's sold how many books and done all these things. I get it. But it's just difficult in our situation. Because not only that, but like, as a ministry teamer, as somebody who actually traveled around and put the events on, I will tell you that there were moments where the bus would break down, and we were using retired Jersey Transit buses that had been kicked out of service like 15 years prior. And so they got these buses on the cheap, and these buses were old. They were struggling, man. They were not top of the line tour buses, and we bunked on them. So they had bunk beds, bunk bed kits. They took out the seats and they put up these bunk beds, and we slept on these buses and lived on these buses when we would go from place to place. That was a second year thing. So you could stay a second year after your first, and you could be a part of the team that put on Acquire the Fire. But we were, I think Corey on the documentary had mentioned that we lived off of about $5 a day. When I was there, it was $5.50. And that was your food. That's what you had to get food with for the entire day. So prices in 2011 and 2010 were different than prices today. But still, that's a very small amount. I mean, you could get a decent meal from McDonald's for $5, but that would be the entire thing that you'd have for the day. So it was definitely a struggle. And I will tell you, I knew of one person in particular who literally, he starved himself and saved up all of his money so that he could buy a ring to propose to his girlfriend and marry her. And people were like just trying to buy little things for him here and there so that he could actually eat. He was so determined to do this. And he did. He made it. They've been married ever since, actually. There's your love story for the day. Yeah, it's wonderful. True love.
That's actually really cool. I mean, I'm sorry that he struggled, but I'm really glad it worked out and he knew it was a good call.
He did, yeah. I'm super happy for him too. So it's cool. But obviously, I won't name drop him. I didn't get his permission. So,
Okay.
but yes, it was a challenge. And a lot of people you would see just under this, let's say this repression, this sense of repression. They call it a spirit of repression, but it was a sense where you just had the weight of the world on your shoulders of how am I going to find this money as a teenager who's not allowed to work a job? You weren't allowed to work a job while you were there. Yes, that was the other thing. I knew of one fourth year intern who got special permission to work a job, and nobody else was working a job because this demanded your full and total attention. You needed to be right here, focused, doing everything you could for the kingdom of heaven. You were not to be engaged in anything else. So there were definitely sections of people who were really struggling to make it. A number of them did get financially dismissed. And as we saw later in life, the numbers come out. We were paying this guy $100,000 to come speak. There was definitely an anger inside of the alumni community that started to bubble up to the surface. Why are we using the funds like this? And why are we renting out stadiums that are 3 times the size of the ticket sales that we have? Paying for these venues that are much bigger than everything. And yet, here are these people that are struggling just to make it. They can't even afford to stay there, and they're working for the ministry. We all signed up to fundraise, but in hindsight, you really ask yourself why. So, for me, let's go ahead and unpack this a little bit further. I leave the ministry, I go further, and I ended up in these jobs that were very dead end jobs. There's no moving forward or advancement inside of these jobs, or I would work for people who were just, I'm going to give you the bare minimum and you're just going to accept it and be okay with it. And I realized that after the fact, that that was because of the way that I'd been programmed in my own head to accept just the bare minimum, that I intentionally went and found people that were only willing to give me that. And so I almost sought that out for a long period of time. And it came to a head when I started working for one company that was actually a really good company. And they recognized my value and they said, we hired you for this job down here. You're way more important than that. You have knowledge and experience and skills that could put you way higher. We're going to promote you to this job up here. And I was floored. I ended up making like a $10 raise within like a very short time frame. And it was a big number for me because it represented like 33% of my paycheck. Yeah, a big thing. And I ended up going crazy. I was working myself to death to try to justify the money that they were giving me. And then I was trying to make everybody happy, all the customers and all of the stakeholders and all of the project managers happy. And it can't be done. I don't know how much experience you have with business people, but there is no way that you can make everyone happy all the time. It's impossible.
It's a thankless job.
It is
Uh-huh.
100%. If there are minimal complaints, we're happy. The fewest amount of complaints is great, but you still have to be able to go home at night. I was working 80 hours, 90 hours a week, to justify the salary that they'd given me. And it was a salary position, so there wasn't overtime on it. But again, the company was a good company. They pulled me in and they said, hey, you're working yourself to death. You can't do this. By the way, here's a raise. And they gave me even more money on top of it. But they're like, but you can't keep doing that. I ended up going so hard on that I self-destructed and everything started to fall apart for me right there. It got to the point that I started making really stupid decisions that I had to be reprimanded for. And sure enough, they did. They're like confused as to why I'm doing this. And I could see in their eyes, they're just like, I don't understand why. And I didn't understand why. I couldn't figure it out. But after that, I ended up getting a divorce. My wife left me. She was cheating on me. She left me. And the church that we were a part of at the time was also a very high control environment that was run by a guy who he was a piece of work. I'll say it like that. He would make up stories about people all the time so that he could justify kicking them out of the church and then showing everyone else in the church why he needed to continue to be the spiritual leader there because he's protecting them from these terrible, vicious wolves that are coming in. He's kicking them out before they have a chance to poison the flock, essentially. And it happened like 10 times. I figured it out after the fact. I talked with all these people after I got kicked out of the church. But my ex wife made stories about me so that she could get the sympathy from the congregation and I could get the excommunication to justify her cheating on me, essentially.
Oh, that's so interesting. That was like the culture of the place that he started.
Yes.
Such a manipulation. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's so unfair, and usually to people who are really very innocent and do-gooders, and now they're being accused of things, and it can be very shocking to your system when that's happening to you.
Absolutely. It flipped my entire life upside down. I ended up quitting the one job, and then I started just trying to do whatever I could for myself to make it through. And then, of course, the divorce happens, and I'm in therapy after that. Ironically, I went to the therapist that the pastor chose for me, and the therapist didn't recommend the pastor back. He had to work very diligently to pull me out of the church. If he had come out and just said, "Hey, maybe you should consider that this church is cultish," I would have been like, "I'm reporting you to the pastor right now. Like, this is bad." He had to, through persuasion in a certain period of time, get me to a point where I was like, maybe I do want to try a different church. Maybe I don't want to stay here at this one. And then eventually, when it all came down, he gave me this book called The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. When I finally decided to leave the church, and then I was like, okay, I get it now. But it took a long time. What I've heard it likened to, and I agree with this analogy, is when you're number one growing up, says that there's usually one high control parent, and there's one very much a laissez faire, let it be type of parent. And the let it be type of parent teaches you to ignore the elephant in the room. That is the high controlling parent who's usually very volatile, very angry. And those outbursts are just played off as, well, that's just who he is, or that's just who she is. You just let it go. It's not that big of a deal. You're the problem if you think that there is a problem. And then you end up in an organization like Teen Mania, where they have the exact same type of mentality. And a lot of the people that were there were the broken and the hurting and the poor and the feeling oppressed. And it definitely guided us like a beacon, essentially, because it was a very, I don't want to say self important organization, because it wasn't, in a sense, it was, but it was an organization that you felt like you were making a huge difference. And I think in a lot of places, they tout themselves as the one making the real difference. We're the ones that are actually fixing the world. We're the ones that are actually benefiting mankind. All these other places, they're saying that they're doing things, and you might see a little bit of things here, or a little bit of things there. But we're the ones that are really doing the legwork to make this whole world a better place. You see that with the Scientology series that was on TV for a while. That was at Teen Mania, and at that church that I went to, was at both places. That church touted themselves as the only real church in the entire city. We're the only ones that are actually doing something. In Teen Mania, it's like we're literally out there reaching 100,000 teenagers every single year for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And especially if you're on the ministry team, like I was, and you were on the bus, like you were greater spiritually than everybody else. Now, you weren't told that outright, but there was definitely the understanding that you were the spearhead, you were the front of the line, the ones really going out and making that difference. And so people who had felt overlooked their entire life, people who had felt like they weren't significant, they didn't matter for their entire life, were getting this accolade, this love, and this outpouring to them. And man, we just ate it up. We ate it up because it was fantastic. And we felt like, wow, look at us now. Me personally, I was really depressed growing up. I talked to my siblings, and three of us, in some way, shape, or form, had ideas of committing suicide because we were very much exceptionally depressed. I will say my mom, before she had met my dad, or right around the time she met my dad, had a huge traumatic experience happen to her, and it left her in a very depressed state for a long period of time. So she struggled to be a mom to us growing up. And that affected us and our self worth and our ability to see ourselves, which then played into me going to Teen Mania, played into me getting all these low end jobs, and then finally getting a job that treated me right and saying, I can't handle this, and self destructing at it. It took a lot of therapy to unpack all of that,
Yes, yes, yes.
just a little bit.
Couple weeks, if not years. There's so much that you said. Each thing that you said could be its own show. We could talk for hours, and hopefully we'll be able to connect again and continue some of these conversations. I do want to say something about this job that you had where they were recognizing you and your talent, and they were paying you accordingly, and it was more than your system could handle. There is something about not feeling deserving and also having a very conflicted relationship with money, but also being given something for what you're doing, because then you're not in that same mode of sacrificing yourself for a cause, that you're actually receiving something, you're not quite sure what to do with it, and then you think you have to up your game. Like you're saying, you have to prove that it's okay to receive it. It is very interesting. I think about myself going into this field, working at social service agencies and making very little. And a lot of the social service agencies, they wanted you to give back. They wanted you to donate to United Way or whatever else as part of their contract there. So here you're giving back your money. And then when I started private practice, people said, "Oh, what do you want to charge?" I said, mm, I don't know. It is so fraught and I have no idea. And I started seeing a lot of people pro bono, and then I couldn't pay my own bills. And I needed to think this through because I thought I can't live like this. And then it would crush me if I would then raise my rate and someone would say, "How do you justify charging that much?" And I'm like, "That's actually not that much, but don't do that to me. You don't realize how long it took me to just get there." So I think it is really hard for a lot of people to feel like it's okay to receive. And then you somehow feel that, because I think a lot of these groups run on this technique of influence called reciprocity. I'm going to give to you. What are you going to give back? We need to have you give back tenfold. So then how do you go into the world receiving and feeling okay about it and just saying thank you? It's very hard.
Absolutely. And to that same point, this started off just as a reminder. You were talking about us not getting enough money to eat, and we were fundraising to be able to stay there. And the idea of how the money was used and how the money was spent inside of the ministry. And these were the consequences, the long term consequences, essentially, that played out in my life. And I'll tell you for my brother as well. He's a successful businessman today, has done very well for himself. But in the beginning, he was struggling to make it. And one thing that my grandma kept on talking to him about was, how come you're not charging what you're worth? How come you're not charging what you're worth? Consistently. It took him a long time to say, you know what, this is actually what I'm worth. That's what I need to be charging. I went into business for myself and I ended up failing in business. And I had somebody look at my contracts afterwards and they said, you could have easily charged 15 to 20% more on every single one of these. And it would have been still low at that point. But I felt so bad about this idea of charging all this money for what I was doing. That really comes back as a direct reflection of how we see ourselves. There's a value that we place upon ourselves. And obviously, in the marketplace, it's a little bit more nuanced because there's a lot of data that backs up what you're worth to a company. And I'm not going to be worth something to one company that I will be worth to a different company. So if I'm in this field over here and I specialize in X, I'm going to be worth a lot more to a company that does that than I'm going to be to a company that picks up your garbage, for instance. I'm not worth the same thing to them. If I hold a PhD in neuroscience or something to that extent, they're not going to pay me for that as a garbage pickup man. But if I'm on a leading research place and we're actually doing some work towards that and the degree is being used, then it's worth something. But just in the sense of a simple, basic human decency, what every single person is worth, we have value, but the way that we see ourselves matters. And that's something that took me a long time to realize outside of Teen Mania. And I look at, in some of the best parts of my time at Teen Mania were the fact that I did feel like I was valuable. I felt like I was worth it. Part of that was because of things like my first year, I got called up to be a second year position. And that was exceptionally rare. And that's where I ended up being an actor. I will tell you, it wasn't because of my tremendous acting skills that I got called up to be an actor. It was because the drama that they had that year, they needed a football coach. And I spoke about football 24/7, 365. And they said, this is our guy. He can do it. They had another kid that they called up along with me who was the same age as me, but he was an actor. And they made him the star quarterback position in the drama. He had never thrown a football in his life. He didn't even know how to throw a football. But he was that talented as an actor that he could play it off. And he was just tremendously good at it. I couldn't have done that They pulled me in because I talked about football 24/7. They're like, this guy could be a football coach. People believe that.
Yes, absolutely. That's so interesting. And I know you were also before going to talk more about the drama and the names of the different shows and plays. And I mean, I find the names of these organizations and front groups and splinter organizations all connected to this so fascinating. Actually, they're extreme. It's very interesting to go over all these names.
It had a bunch of different branches. And it does address some of that in the documentary as well. But basically, your overarching high above is Teen Mania Ministries. And then down from that, you get the Honor Academy, which is all the interns that put on everything. So a lot of us were in call centers and we would call for these different organizations. You have global expeditions. This was the missions trip. So they would send kids all over the globe, go to like 30 some odd different countries every single year. And it was insane. They take these kids. Some of them were like 1 month trips, 2 month trips, 2 week trips. We sent kids everywhere. And there was a whole lot of logistics that went into that. They had another one on campus that was called Extreme Camps. Speaking of extreme, there's that word. That fit in really well under the Mania umbrella.
Yes, yes.
Extreme and Mania. You could see where we bent as an organization. But yeah, the extreme camps was just they'd invite youth groups to the campus and they'd put on, these 1 or 2 week camps where they would get the chance to do these crazy fun events or whatever. And it was just like your typical summer camp type of situation, but then, of course, with a very high twist in evangelism. So you'd memorize a bunch of Bible verses. You'd have a lot of different competitions that you would participate in. At the end of it, there would be a lot of sermons and worship sessions, things of that nature. But yeah, it's so global expeditions, Honor Academy, extreme camps, and then there was a Center for Creative Media. They were the ones that put together all the content for Acquire the Fire, and Acquire the Fire is the last one. And that was the actual conference that we put on. So a lot of these were run by first-year interns. Acquire the Fire had its own call center where first-year interns would call a bunch of churches and try to get them to come to the event. So I think it was Phil Boltz that was talking about being a telemarketer for Jesus. I feel that. That was accurate. We absolutely were. We'd have to make a certain amount of phone calls every single day. We would talk to a certain amount of people. That would lead to a certain amount of commitments, very business oriented. And I was a manager in that with my second year. I actually was one of the regional managers. I was in charge of the Nashville event. And we had a forecast. There was like an actual Excel spreadsheet that we would use that had all these different numbers in it. If we have this many interns calling this many people for this many days, it'll lead to this many people picking up the phone. Out of that, this many people will make the decision to come. And so it was all very sales oriented, very business oriented. And that's how we were able to forecast how many people we'd have at the events.
If we can go back to this idea of being a telemarketer for Jesus, what I find so interesting is that when you're involved in these kinds of activities, you might not realize what it is that you're doing, and you might not be able to look at it. You don't have the distance to really see, and to also see who it is supporting and who's benefiting from it and who's not, because you're so in it. And it is hard. I work with a lot of people who have left organizations like this. They have a sense of loss over the sense of importance of doing something that really, like you're saying, that you had the weight of the world on your shoulders for yourself, for the whole planet. And that feels very important. It also can stress people out, and it can actually cause autoimmune diseases. And then what I think is important too is that not only do you have the loss, but then you have, from that perspective, you can start to have those insights, which can lead to resentment. It can lead to anger. It can lead to a lot of confusion. And the resistance of getting caught up in something without knowing exactly what it is and what you're going to be giving your time, your energy, your devotion to. It shifts people's awareness and I think sensitivities. But it is still hard to go without feeling like you're doing something big, because that's awe-inspiring and it gets you charged up and it's its own high. And I'm sure that it's difficult to just be in day-to-day life sometimes.
Let's unpack the telemarketer for Jesus thing a little bit here. So, absolutely. When you come to the Honor Academy, and it's funny, I experienced the same thing when I joined the military. There's a ton of people that are sitting there, they're ready to shake your hand. They're ready to talk to you and say, like, you just made the best decision of your life, especially in the evangelical circles. It's really, really propped up in the sense of you're doing something that's so wonderful and so incredible. You're making a difference for the kingdom of God. Of course, when we joined the military, they're like, you're coming out to defend our country and you're protecting us and the American way of life and the freedoms. And it's funny because I'm going to go to my unit and I'm going to work on the Jeeps. I'm going to do maintenance on the Jeeps. Motor pool Mondays, they call it. For a reserve, we do it at certain times. And while you're sitting there changing the oil in a Jeep, you're thinking, I'm doing something incredible for the defense of my country. You're not. You're thinking, I'm changing the oil in a Jeep. It's not really that big of a deal. You want that Jeep to run in case you ever have to take it to a combat zone. That's important. But at the same point, you're changing the oil in a Jeep. That's what it is. But people are just patting you on the back for it and congratulations. We're so proud of you and such a big deal. And when we went to the Honor Academy, the exact same thing. Everyone, you're making the best decision of your life. I can't tell you how many times I heard that phrase. Everyone was super excited about it. And then you get there and you get put in these ministry placements. And the vast majority of us were inside of call centers so that they could have an outreaching arm to try to get people to these events. The camps would bring in a certain amount of money. The global expeditions would bring in a certain amount of money. And all of that stuff was, and Acquire the Fire brought in a certain amount of money. But it was also a place where they would get leads for the Honor Academy and global expeditions. So all of these, it's one organization that's got many different arms that all feed into each other. It was actually a very brilliant business model that was put together. And I have to say, looking back on it, it did a very good job of cycling through and getting people to continue this. Because a lot of times interns would end up recruiting other people after they left the internship to global expeditions trips. And then they'd recruit people to come to the Honor Academy. So you had a rapidly expanding customer base that were singing the praises of all of this, that were willing to put people back into that situation and kind of recommend them to it. In that sense, it was like the perfect multi-level marketing scheme. And then it had an end date on it as well. So you weren't like stuck in it indefinitely. But realistically, you can take the kid out of Teen Mania, but you can't take the Teen Mania out of the kid. Even when they grow up, they're still caught in that mindset to a certain extent until we deconstructed, I should say. And we were like, wait a second, there was some stuff back there that was weird. But I think the idea was you get placed in a call center. As teenagers, we hated talking on the phone. That was the worst. That was the worst. A lot of us were texting and things that had just kind of come out, I want to say in 2005, 2006. And then the iPhone came out while I was at Teen Mania in 2010. That was the first generation iPhone. So we just got a hold of that while I was there. But I mean, the phone calls, physically picking up a phone and calling people, that was crazy. We didn't do that. But then when we got there, it's like Jesus commands you to. They wouldn't necessarily say Jesus commands us, but here's the line they'd feed to us. And I know because when I was a manager there, I ended up feeding it to a lot of people too. And if any of them are listening, I'm sorry. I apologize. All my former interns. If you're faithful with another man's vision, then God will give you a vision of your own. If you're not faithful with another man's vision, God will not give you a vision of your own. That was what we were told and what we told everybody consistently.
Wow.
Furthermore, to the extent that you're willing to lay down yourself and serve somebody else, is the extent that people will lay down themselves and serve you in the future. So if you serve half-heartedly, then you're going to have half-hearted servants when you have your vision that God blesses you with to move forward into the world. And you're going to have to fight that the entire time. Whatever is going around comes around. That's the idea.
Incredible. Oh my goodness. That is so manipulative and it's false. And it's such a shame because life doesn't work that way. It'd be lovely if there were this exact equation in that way. But it's interesting. They were using everything they could to motivate you to just keep working and keep going. My goodness. And also that because you were going to reap the benefit of it, that at some point you'd be rewarded. as though that is how things go, A plus B equals C always. But no. And I'm sure it's devastating to find that out, that that's just not the case.
Right. And there was absolutely that. When I talk about legalism, because that was a term that was used very often when we were there, the legalism aspect would be that A plus B equals C always. So there would be an idea of like, if you do exactly what God's design is for your marriage, if you live this way, and that's where the purity culture came in. If you were willing to do the purity culture, these ideas or these concepts, then it's going to lead to the greatest marriage that you ever had. And everything's going to work out perfectly because marriage is definitely not two completely different broken people who are trying to make it work together. Marriage is two people that when God blesses, everything just magically works out like a fairy tale ending, happily ever after. And I think that's where I really started to get disillusioned to the idea, is because constantly you're taught this idea of delayed gratification for the purpose of, delayed gratification for the purpose of, always. And so if you're willing to sacrifice yourself here, there's going to be a greater reward there. If you're willing to do all these things, and ultimately, if you sacrifice all this time and all this effort, you get this wonderful reward in heaven one day. And that's fantastic because that's the perfect carrot on a stick that you're never going to see until you die. And you don't have the access to people who died to be able to say, hey, how was your reward in heaven? Oh, yeah, it was fantastic. Or, it was pretty mediocre for all the things that I put into life. I was really hoping for something better than this. No one's able to tell you that. So it's a perfect carrot on the stick that pushes that idea forward. And so when they talk about that with your work, they talk about that with your marriage, they talk about that with your family, they talk about that with all the different aspects of life that you're going to walk into. And I know that that's where a lot of disillusion has come from the alumni community, the ones that are looking back on that time and saying, we were promised a whole lot and we were delivered a whole lot less when this was all said and done. It's really hard to rectify those two. And all those phone calls that you made for this organization. And it was heartbreaking when you saw the finances, when everything really went down and all these youth groups that had been attendance for 25 years, some of them, that really believed in the cause and believed in the people who were doing it, were asking for refunds. And we're like, there's no money to refund. And I was, of course, way out of the organization at that point. But seeing it happen in real time and knowing that that was going on, it was heartbreaking. And I know certain people contacted me and they said, I can't believe this. This is absolutely shameful of how far it's fallen. When you start to follow the breadcrumbs, you realize it was falling quite a while, almost the whole time. It's just because of these ideas that were holding it up were mirrors and smoke.
It is so devastating. This whole idea also, I wrote this down, that delayed gratification for the purpose of ... That is something that keeps people in organizations for a long time, sometimes in relationships for a long time. And this whole idea of like a carrot being dangled and something will come to you or it's right around the corner. You see this in multi-level marketing, you see this in religion sometimes, and your life is miserable now, but you're going to go to heaven. Like, it's the whole idea, I think, of delayed gratification. There is this very interesting thing that happens where I think people get tired of waiting and they get to be done with that. I would love for you to talk about what you've been able to do now that you're not in this period of your life where you're needing to wait for and work towards. You can be in it. And that's so exciting. You get to do the things that you want to do. You get to be the father that you want to be. You get to be the husband you want to be. You get to be in reserves. You get to help with feeling that you're a part of protecting your country and what it's like to kind of step into the shoes of your life in real time and not feeling like I'm working for something so that I reap the benefits maybe later on. What's that been like for you?
Very interesting you asked that question. And here's the reason why. I'm still stuck in that mindset, working towards. I mean, I've come to actually realize it. And I think that's, of course, half the battle. But realistically, there's so many things that we haven't been able to achieve. And a lot of things that I haven't been able to achieve have happened as a result of my divorce and as court actions that have happened as a result of my divorce. I have one son that I barely ever get to see. everything that I have to do is forward thinking. And the idea of like, if I can do this, maybe I'll have the chance to have a better relationship with him one day in the future. It's always still looking at that one day in the future. I think about my wife's kids. I love them to death, but we get a limited amount of time with them too. And I have to think about what can we do today that'll actually impact one day in the future. We're so day-to-day living right now, especially with the astronomical rise in rent costs, the astronomical rise in food costs and gas costs and all these other different things, that it's really difficult to make it. A lot of people our age, my wife's a stay-at-home mom, because the cost of daycare and the availability of daycare, both of those in tandem make it impossible to make it. So we have to try to live off of one income. And right now, I'm actually looking for a job because I just got back. I got laid off from a corporate job last year, and I've been looking for one ever since. And that's why I joined the military, because I figured that would be my second job. And I have the reserves, and I would be able to do that once a month, and I would get certain benefits and whatnot from that. But we worked really hard on Dave Ramsey principles for a long time about the delayed gratification again. And at some point, I will tell you, here's the inside scoop. My wife and I had an argument last week. And part of the argument was that she is a huge gift receiver and a gift giver. Her love language is giving and receiving gifts. And consistently, I have not gotten her gifts and I have not been able to get her gifts because the finances have been so tight. She's looking at me and she's like, "You keep on saying that you can't do this because we're worried about this bill happening or that bill happening. And yet, is there going to be any change in the future? Is this really going to happen? If we continue to delay this gratification, is there actually going to be a payoff? Because we've been doing this for the majority of our lives. I've been doing it since I was 17 years old when I went to the Honor Academy. And here I am at 33. It's 16 years later. And there's still this whole entire idea of like, if I could just delay a little bit longer, like it's going to be great in the future. And she's like, at some point, you're going to have to accept that you have to live today. You can't keep on repressing today for the hope that tomorrow will actually be better. It was tough because I'm sitting here and these bills that we're facing, they're real bills. They're things that are like, we actually have to get this done or else. And yet she's right. There's that constant struggle and that constant battle. So I'm still learning that particular lesson. And I will notice that when I talk to certain alumni from Teen Mania, that a lot of us have that same feeling of like, you can't rest, you can't relax. There is no lay back because consistently we were taught you have to go. And even with my dad growing up, you have to go. You go, go, go. Consistently get out there and do something and make that difference and whatever it takes. And sacrifice. Sacrifice is required for anything good to happen in life. And while that's true to an extent, you do have to sacrifice in order to get certain things in life. There is a healthy amount and there's an unhealthy amount. There's a spot where you're actually listening to yourself and doing what's reasonable and plausible, and a spot where you throw yourself to the side and it's unhealthy because you don't have any sort of identity outside of sacrificing for these causes or for this person or for that idea. And that's a lesson that I'm still trying to learn even today.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing that because I think that that's very real. There are a lot of people who still feel like their life is on hold and they're waiting and they're hoping and they're thinking for the future and they're not necessarily able to enjoy today and sit back and reap the benefits of all they've done to actually have this because they're just thinking, what do I need to do in order to get there? And so it's hard to actually be present. It's hard to feel really present, really grounded, and appreciate what's happening all around you. I don't know your wife at all, but I also know that sometimes people really do appreciate homemade things and a lovely meal that is made for them if they're the ones who always make the meals. And I don't know if that's the situation in your household.
I do what I can.
Right, right. So there are just some lovely gestures that can sometimes be their own gifts. But I hope that you get to enjoy the work that you've done to get where you are. And yes, it is very true that sometimes when the legal system gets involved and you're dealing with things around kids, you hope, you wonder, you don't know how that relationship is going to turn out, but you do what you can to live your life in a way that puts you in a good situation emotionally so that if and when you get to have that relationship, you'll be able to be a healthy person within it. And so I think for you to be able to enjoy the Heffelbower bunch that you have, and just know that you are this person who is doing an incredible amount of work by getting the word out for people to really help them understand their experience. And that, just as you were saying, that sometimes the influence is still there, it's still under your skin, and you have to make yourself aware of it. I've heard a lot of clients say to me, I was done with the cult, but it wasn't done with me. I had to really look at that. So thank you for that perspective. It's very real. And I wish you the best. If anyone has a great job position for Timothy, let us know. I hope to be able to talk to you again.
I would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure too. Take good care.
And you as well. Thank you.
One more thing before you go. Thank you so much to Timothy for all that he shared. It is quite incredible, all that he's been through, and so many messages he's gotten about his life, about his worth, about what's his fault. Being told, even from a young age, don't fall asleep. You can be tired, but don't fall asleep. Setting up impossible situations where you're going to fail, you're going to feel weak. This idea also that you're supposed to struggle, that life is supposed to be a struggle. And I think so many times we hear these stories where the only people who struggle are the children. The only people who struggle are the members, not necessarily the leaders. And the leaders are the ones making people struggle and then saying, you're supposed to struggle. Well, isn't that convenient? And then they can get away with making you struggle. And for what? What do you get from it? And sometimes what you get is trauma, or just this idea that, well, you know how to struggle, you know how to suffer. So maybe that's what life is supposed to be like. And that's how you get rewarded. And so many people also that I talk to say they took on so much. They said yes to people. They took on jobs that they knew were going to be hard for them because unless they struggled, it wasn't meaningful, or unless they were really suffering and overwhelmed, that they weren't really showing that they were committed to something. It gets under your skin that your life is supposed to be one of suffering and overwhelm. And there's this other thing that he mentioned, just this phrase, it's because you. It was just this perfect way of putting together these words. It's because you. That is like the narcissist code for redirect focus, how to redirect attention, how to redirect blame, how to make sure that whatever happens to you, you realize is because of you. I remember one time working with a couple where they were coming out of a situation, a Bible-based cultic group, and whenever the wife, I mean, they were still following, even though they were out, they were still following the sexist ideals of the group, but also just he was parroting what the cult leader would say to them. Whatever was wrong in their life was because of them. Whatever they were getting punished for, well, they caused that. So no one had to feel sensitive towards them. No one had to feel compassion. They were supposed to take it. Somehow it was something they deserved because it was because of them. So they're sitting in my office, and what happened was they were having this discussion, and she was saying that she didn't like the way she was being treated by him because he would come home and he would yell at her. And his immediate response was, well, it's because you didn't clean the house while I was gone, and you didn't make sure the kids were all lined up and ready to greet me at the door when I came home, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. So he just thought he was explaining things. He didn't know why that would be a problem. And knowing also, if you're going to be home with lots of kids during the day, you're lucky if you get to brush your teeth or even eat anything yourself. So sometimes forget about cleaning the house. What is really important too is that I learned a lot from my discussion with them, Because I said, how about when she says, I don't like the way you treat me, I don't like the way that you yell at me. If you, as a husband, I said to him, if you can say, well, that's because I, not you, that's because I have learned that it's okay to blame you for everything. And I come home and I'm in a bad mood and I'm hungry and I'm taking it out on you. Or it's because I had a stressful day at work and I couldn't yell at my boss, so I'm yelling at you. Or it's because I am a perfectionist, which he tended to be a little bit, and he wanted everything to be just so. And so they took that on for size, and it was a little hard for him to make that shift, but she appreciated it. But still, I could tell something was missing from this whole conversation. This was about 15 years ago. And I think any self-respecting and professional of any sort learns on the job to a certain degree, even though you hope that they come into it knowing a couple things, but still they're open to learning. And as they were going through these different exercises and he was learning to make I statements instead of you statements, it suddenly hit me what was wrong with this. And what was wrong with it for me was that it shouldn't be about blaming her at all. And it shouldn't be that it's okay for him to yell at her at all. And instead of him finding a nicer way to explain why he was yelling and why he was saying things to her that were mean, he really needed to learn to appreciate all the hard work that she did and to come in and say something like, it's so good to see you, and kiss and hug whoever else was standing there. And I just need a few minutes to put my feet up or to do whatever I need to do. And then I'd love to help you with whatever it is you need help with. Once we moved into that, it took some time, but then it felt much more right. So sometimes there are these intermediate steps of changing the language, but then learning how to look at someone else and their life with respect and with acceptance and seeing that you're an equal partner, getting your needs met by saying, I need a few minutes, but then I'd love to help, and then taking care of their needs. It's something that sometimes needs to be done in stages, and I'm glad I learned from that moment, and they are living happily ever after, still happily married, happy to say. So thank you again, Timothy, for opening up in the very authentic, real way that he did, and I wish him the best, as I know we all do. Take good care, everyone. Talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.